in my opinion, you're responsible for making one of the most beautiful software products out there, both in terms of the actual software and from the brand perspective. Is
Yeah.
there a is there a specific aspect that you feel best embodies the beauty and aesthetic that you were going for?
Yeah, I mean, I think, there's on maybe I'll talk about the product first because that's what we built first.
Mhm.
I think what makes a beautiful product is really two things. One is a kind of an extreme confidence in what it does and in a way that it works intuitively. It delivers the value that you expect consistently and quickly. A product that just does what you expect it to do every time is people are going to fall in love with that, even if it looks like shit, right? It's just like there's a deep value that people want out of things, and that's different than a entertainment product. I think that you maybe would think about that a little bit differently, like something like TikTok. Although I think when you get as big as TikTok, it becomes in everything. There's entertainment, there's utility, there's people find love, like everything's in there. But for you can't really build anything good unless you've made something that is useful. I think the second thing that you can do to make a product feel nice and in a very kind of a superficial way is with that confidence and with that focus, you really need to say no to most of your ideas and only build the things that need to exist and delete the ones that don't, even if people are asking for it. Because if you have less stuff on the screen, people just think it looks better, right? That's just like a really kind of easy win, but actually extremely hard to live up to. Um, because you're gonna get a lot of opportunities to build a feature, and it's only getting easier to build new stuff. And so, I think to make a product that feels nice, it actually requires just a lot of restraint. So that and on top of it, assuming it actually works. On the brand perspective, I would say we reverse engineered a mission out of the product once it was working. As I was using it every day, and I from my background working on Quora, I thought a lot about information and how people obtain information, how knowledge is sort of stored and categorized and incrementally added to the internet. Um, and I always wanted to just ask a question and get the answer immediately. Just that product, the closest we got to it was Quora, but you had to wait for a human to answer it. That sucked. Even when the answers were great, you had to wait. And so when we got Perplexity working in its most basic form, it to me felt like an actual advance, like epistemological advancement, like the idea that you can just like know things instantly on demand all the time about anything. That's an insane like human upgrade, right? Like that just that's just like a real thing that we made. Um, and and then kind of okay, well, how am I feeling right now? Right? Like how am I feeling every day now that I have this thing? I'm feeling more curious. I'm feeling, more optimistic. I feel empowered. I want to learn things. I can learn things. I can learn anything. Every time anyone asks a question in my vicinity, I can just look up and find something. That's an amazing feeling. And brand design is. I would consider brand design to be, you're describing the feelings that are already there. You can't like bullshit brand design. You can't bullshit brand. You can't like tell people to feel things. You're just like representing for them what they already feel if the product's good. And so, I kind of think of it as actually a very downhill problem to build a brand around how Perplexity feels. It does make you feel all those things, and it's fun to exemplify those and embellish those. And hey, there's one cool moment in AI, or one kind of I think a beautiful thing is you can make anything, right? You can make anything in any kind of uh, the medium is evolved. Like we had a very early conversation. I'm like, okay, what was impossible a year ago that is possible now? And like one conversation we had was, I'm like, well, what if our whole brand was just oil paintings? Like a year ago, you would never like, I don't even know who can do an oil painting. And certainly you would never hire a painter to like do brand design for you. But with Midjourney, like we could just decide our aesthetic was oil paintings. That was, this like basic conversation we had. Because Brett, when going into a competitive market, you need to just like do something different than everyone else, just like arbitrarily. And then so there's like, okay, we have the ability to make any aesthetic. So then it's like, okay, what do we want to evoke? Curiosity, knowledge, discovery, and also what's an exciting aesthetic that really hasn't been talked about very much lately, and we went to retrofuturism just because, like, hey, that was a time when people were excited about technology. There's all this like amazing imagery that is like an incredible inspiration, both aesthetically and also spiritually. Um, and yeah, so all this stuff comes together, and then the brand design team is just so talented and creative and just eager to work in a different way, and they just have run with it, and it's become this collective hallucination amongst them, and I don't really do anything anymore.
Yeah, I'm sure you've seen it on Twitter. Everyone seems to absolutely love the kind of that mid-journey style that you guys do. I do specifically.
Yeah.
So back from the very start, when you first see like we have an answer engine here. When you see the technology, what's the core philosophy, like the design philosophy that you were going through at the very beginning when you saw what this technology could do?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think the most basic philosophy is AI is not a product, models are not a product, LLMs are not a product, but they unlock something, and it's an abstraction that's available to us, but we need to present it in a way. We need to apply it to a problem that people actually have. There's a lot of tech demos that are cool, but like, so what? You have to apply it to a problem that people actually have, and then you need to present it in a way that's intuitive. Either like because the UI feels familiar, or because the concepts and the language are familiar, or maybe even colloquial. Like I said, I thought about. I know what people need, and people need answers. I mean, that's just like a fundamental truth, and the thing that technology can provide better than anything ever. And so, I think like once to me, the moment was like, oh yeah, an LLM, the magical part of an LLM is it'll always say something, even if it's wrong. And so all we have to do is make it right more often. And that's like this, and there's because with previous, like, if you ever worked on chatbots or any kind of like auto generated system of responses, like you build the decision tree, right? And there's a long tail of you basically hard code an outcome. It just says like, I don't know. And that's why none of that shit's ever worked, because like people actually need the long tail, the phone trees, like whatever, like none of those things have ever worked. They're deeply frustrating, whatever. LLMs say that they always respond with something confidently. And so if we could take that, make it right more often, um, that's something we can work with and build a product around, and especially one where it's just like, again, like it's an extremely complex, wonderful piece of technology, and I'd like to think that we've built a product that actually feels really simple, even though it's like the most complex piece of software I've ever worked on. But if people just see it as like, I type in a question, I get an answer, then the design team's done their job.
Yeah. I think specifically with you guys, something I really I wonder is what I love so much about Perplexity specifically is that you guys are able to plug and play all these new models as they come out,
Yeah,
right? And that's a feature that hardcore enthusiast, AI native people enjoy. Like they want to be able to pick. They want Claude 3.7. They want
yeah,
R1 when it comes out. They want but say to a non-native AI person who comes to Perplexity for an answer engine and they come on and they see this long list of different models and different deep research, or you could do reasoning, or you could do pro. Like, how did you go through thinking about that?
totally. Uh, so most people don't see it, and that's great. By design, most people, they click on the brightest thing on the screen. They just sort of jam the buttons and flow through. They don't read the text. They don't look at the drop downs. They don't peek in the menus. the average software user is just like going to hit the big stuff, and that's totally fine. And we need to build the product doing that. Um, and so, but we also need to make sure that, the kind of default automatic experience, if you do click the biggest, brightest things on the screen, that experience is perfect. That's the bar. That's not we can't assume that, people will set up the right combination of models and, do their settings right. Like I'm not designing a product that like requires you to fill out a form to use it. So we need to make sure that like those users, the average users, the most people in the world will just get the best experience without really thinking about how everything works. They don't need to know. But like you said, there are people that really do want to try stuff. There's I think a combination of people who are curious and like want to tinker, and then there are some people who have actually found that like maybe Claude is better at coding than ChatGPT or something. And obviously that's like a moving target. It changes every month. Um, but there are people that care about that, and we want to support it. And so that it's truly a balance. And I think we just rely on the fact that the average user doesn't really notice most things on the screen. But people who really want to find the thing, we need to make it easy to find. So that's kind of like the basic design principle. Good defaults.
I guess on the current state of design, there was this tweet today actually that went kind of viral that said that today design was dead, and that
Shit.
the early 2010s represented a golden age of creativity before design systems and minimalism sanitized and systematized the creative process.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? And specifically, how can designers today balance creativity along with some of those constraints on modern design practices?
Totally. Well, I think like I get what that person is saying. I started my design career in 2010. We used Photoshop to design apps, which is like silly to think about. We hacked like a lot of the features, blending modes and layer comps and stuff, like stuff that just was literally designed for editing photographs. We like bent it to help us design apps. And, that was stupid. Like, let's not romanticize that. And a lot of us at that time, like, also just said, fuck it, let's just learn how to code. And let's just, especially in that era, it was pretty simple. HTML, CSS, maybe some sort of MVC framework like Ruby on Rails or Django or something. Like, that stuff was pretty straightforward. But the nice thing about that era, I would say there's sort of a pros and cons, and I think, it's easy to tweet a generalization. The nice thing about that era is that, like, yeah, nobody had really figured out what it means to design a good app and an intuitive app. Not even Apple, right? Like there weren't standard patterns. There was an overexcitement around skeuomorphism, and then an overcorrection away from it. Where like you lost all the good parts, like color contrast was destroyed by a lot of like kind of early flat design stuff. And so I think like there was a fun era of just like, hey, let's just experiment and try stuff. And there was a lot of apps that I think where we were like really just like experimenting with interaction design, which I think was fun. That we can't. I think the thing that a mistake designers often make is like it's fun to design novel stuff. And it really is like coming up with a new animation or like a new way a new button that pops open a bunch of menus, and like that stuff's fun to melt, but like our job is to make software for people, and they need to figure it out. And it's so easy to be overly clever. It's so easy to care about the wrong things and get excited about things that don't actually matter, or end up being really confusing for people. And so I would say like the average app was actually like worse and harder to use, even though we were having more fun and exploring more and taking more risks. So, because where we are now is like I would say like for the most part, we've figured out how to design a mobile app, and the world, the average person in the world knows how to use a mobile app. That wasn't true in 2010. So the patterns are sort of solved. And I think anyone trying to innovate on interaction design on mobile design is taking a big risk. It's not like there's nothing to under a rock to discover, but it's probably not worth the risk. Like, do you want to, there a lot of things need to go right for your startup to be successful. Do you want to try to like redesign how mobile UI should work as part of that? Like, you're probably better off just following standard patterns, like how navigation stacks work and modals and whatever, right? You should just make things that feel obvious. Um, so that's like that, that there's an outcome where we are now where like, yeah, I think everything is probably over systematized, but there's a good part about that, which is we are generally using all the same UI patterns. There's a bad version of that where a lot of designers that maybe started their career in the last, I don't know, 8 years, like they actually have never designed an app from scratch. They've never had to kind of like first principles their way through navigation and interaction design or even build like a full like kind of color palette and button system, things like that. So I think there's actually a lot of like lost knowledge right now through over systemization, right? If your whole job was like you joined a company and then you just joined a team that like kind of already built all that stuff and you just move components around, like you're not really doing too much real product design. So yeah, I would say there's a lot of things going on, and I think there's some truth to that, and it's also a little bit of a silly thing to say.
Something else pretty big that's going on is your job's very interesting because it's very much at the intersection of AI and design.
Yeah.
So I would love to know what you're kind of thinking right now, this like vibe coding movement and how specifically it impacts design. Because some of these tools say lovable bolt, and I don't know if you've ever played with any of those kind of things. It's very playing with taste, like human taste with AI is very interesting.
Yeah.
They're making strides, I would say, but definitely not anywhere close to being able to do it themselves. So I'd love to know what you kind of think about.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think, so my maybe some context is I write code pretty much every day. I have my whole career. I would consider myself like a pretty good front-end engineer. And so I think it's wonderful that like anyone designers are getting closer to the metal rather than going in the other direction, which is like building prototypes that are in a sandbox that's not real. So anything that kind of like gets designers in code, in push, like making diffs, branches, pushing real shit into a code base, whether it's a solo project or as part of a team, I think that's really good because it keeps us honest, and also keeps us on the same team as engineers. I think what the reality though is like you can't really vibe code as part of a team. You're gonna write a bunch of shitty code that's not helpful. You're gonna just make bugs. You really kind of need to know how things work, and especially if you break something, you need to know how to fix it. For a solo project, it's wonderful, right? Like, who cares how good your code is? Just like maybe you can make a website and make an app, or maybe just you want to explore something like who, and then truly, yeah, who cares how good the code is? You're just trying some idea out. So I think like the people that I see celebrating vibe coding the most are people that usually just work alone anyways. And they're finding a lot of, their process of idea to shipping is like, significantly faster, which is wonderful. But I would love for designers to get closer to the metal. I think it's important. I think this is like overall a good thing. Um, I think in terms of like purely generative and UI, I think, for the most part, it's fine. A company like Perplexity could not be built with an AI designing everything. Like that's just like not how it works. You know what? There's a lot of software in the world, and a lot of it needs to be better than it is right now, or it doesn't exist. Right? Maybe it's just like someone has an idea and they don't know how to do it. So I do subscribe to the notion that like 5 years from now there will be just more software and better, and the average quality will be better because these tools exist. I think it's overall a good thing, but the sort of top end, like you're not going to, the top end of products where like you're in a hyper competitive environment where you need to design a product for a billion people and it needs to be better than the alternative, like all that. I think you're going to still need designers that are being very thoughtful about how to use brand and interaction design to like meet business goals.
Yeah, on that point, Dylan Field actually did a recent interview with Gary Tan at YC. And he talked about how as we this slope, like software, the actual software development is getting easier and easier, like actually building the app, but ease of design does not seem to be following that same curve, which actually he says is now people need for designers is actually higher now than it was, say, a while back.
Totally.
Or not a while back, but yeah. Do you kind of do you agree with that? I guess designers are more in demand now because ease of building the software is easier, but the the same slope isn't following in design. And do you think that eventually that will catch up?
Yeah, I mean, I think like I really what okay, so just this is a bit of a meta point, but I really kind of want to always push back on not the general notion that people have around like roles, and to the extent that they become people's identity. I'm a designer.
Mm.
I'm an engineer.
Yeah.
I would never do that other thing, or I'm incapable of doing that other thing, right? Like product management, whatever. Like people kind of like make that who they are, and I think it's silly because you're gonna box yourself into your tools and your, I don't know, worldview. And I would rather everyone just think like, okay, what does it take to make software? Basic formulas. You need like someone to plan what we're doing and why, someone to figure out how's it going to work, how's it going to look, and someone to make it work. Those could all be one person, of course, or they could be three people. You probably don't need more than three people most of the time. Um, but just given that, okay, it's become a lot easier to make things work. It's become a lot faster. It's not any easier to figure out what to build and why. That'll never be easy. It'll actually be harder because more people will be making shit anyways, right? The markets are getting more competitive on every market, whether it's competing with Google or a to-do list app. That's there's a lot more options that consumers have, and distribution is like going to win every time. So then there's the sort of like, okay, how's it going to work? And the people that tend to be designers are comfortable with that kind of infinite possibility space. I mean, that's like fundamentally what creative work is, right? You could make anything. So what do you make and why? And that is a type of decision that not only will never go away, but yeah, is that kind of like it's happening more and more frequently. I think for two reasons. One, it is easier to make software. Let's say AI didn't exist. Well, hey, just like React is easier to write, build shit than like it was with Django or whatever in the past. It's easier to have an idea and build it. But now there's AI, so it's easier to write that code. But also a lot of the product experiences are non-deterministic, which means there's even more possibilities, right? Not only are we building an interface and a product, but it has infinite possibilities within just like a random feature. And so somebody needs to say, here's the boundaries. Here's out of all the million possibilities of how this thing could work or how it could look and how it could feel, someone needs to decide. And who better to do that than the designer? Because that's just like that's always been our job, is to just sort of like pick the path. I think designers are pathfinders, they're leaders, they're galvanizers, and at least, the good ones are. They're, and They should be able to sort of, given any outcome, pick up, figure out a plan to get to the thing that's actually going to work, the thing that users are going to understand, the things that's going to feel good, that's going to make the business successful, all that stuff. And so I totally agree. Like, hey, that's there's like more need for someone to just tell us what to do or figure out the plan or whatever, right? Because it's so easy. I could just, like you could vibe code anything. And so, but that doesn't actually make, it's not going to make you're not going to build a business just because you made a thing. So there's a lot more decisions to make.
Yeah, I guess more the question was on the demand for a high quality design, right? Is more in demand now, say, than it was 5 years ago. Actually, I don't know. Do you think that's the case or no?
I think Look, I think most software, like, doesn't need to be that good. It just needs to be better than the average is now. But some software, like, needs to be exceptional. So, people like me, like, we need to exist and work on this and make it our passion. But I think, like, there will be, like, there will be software that people make that's just, like, good enough. And that's kind of always been true. There just, I think, will be more of it, right? Like, as long as it delivers some value. And I think what'll happen is, like, um, let's say some person who's not a designer, they vibe code some product, it becomes successful. Well, guess what's going to happen? Someone who is a designer is going to come in and build a competitor, and their advantage is going to be that it's just, like, better designed or better branded or whatever, right? I don't know. That's just, like, the market forces will sort it out, I think.
And do you think that creates a moat, like, that software is kind of I mean, you can still make outstanding software, but really what is gonna set people apart will be that design and the brand behind the tool.
Yeah, I mean, my tip is UI design is not a moat. You can copy it. Like, my entire career, every innovation I've had has been copied a month later if I worked on anything big enough. Whether it was at Quora, we were copied by Yishihu in China, or with Perplexity. Hey, a lot of stuff that I designed is now in other companies' products, and that's just the way it is. But what you can't copy, there are things you can't copy. Like, one is distribution, one is network effects, uh, and I think those are things that I think about a lot, just because, like, that's what it takes to build a real business. But brand is like, if you look at industries where there's hyper competition, like the alcohol industry, or fashion, right? It's all brand. Or one example I like to give is universities. Like, what the hell is the difference between Harvard and MIT? It's just the brand. Like, you're not going to definitely become more successful if you go to one of those versus the other. And why do people choose to go first to one versus the other? It's all brand. And so I think it's important. And I think historically, like, companies like Facebook have become successful while not having to think about brand as, like, part of their business strategy. Like, this is not necessary, right? They're successful because of the product driven growth loops and network effects and whatever. But hey, not anymore. Like, we all have to think about brand. I think. Well, I think it's part of our opportunity to, like, find an edge, and it has been, and that's, I think, part of the success we've had. Um, and because I think a lot of these products will end up in a little bit of a Pepsi versus Coke dynamic, where people are just gonna have a preference in a way that they can't really describe, and that's brand. At the very least, like, we might as well play that card because it's gonna help us. I don't think we can rely on that entirely, but, um, hey, when you're a startup, you play every strategy that you've got available to you.
Yeah. I think you guys are doing a great job with that, as I said. I mean, I saw that Lee Jung Jae video that you got out that was, like, that very, focused on voice. Actually, I'd like to know more about because that voice you guys' voice mode went there was some iterations that happened along the process. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the way that we overall like to work is just go with your first idea and ship it and learn from just, like, it being out and being something you can use, and something that other people can use and give feedback on. Um, because the alternative is, like, you sit on it, you keep it to yourself, you try it, maybe you explore a lot. But I just think you learn a lot more from launching things. And the voice mode has gone through a lot of that. We launched something, we tried it ourselves, we heard feedback, we launched a second version, same thing. We launched a third version. I'd like to think we've made it better every time, both from a interaction perspective, but also just, like, how it feels to use. There's sort of it is like a living brand of its own, because there's really not much to show. Like, you're supposed to just listen to it. So it's kind of a hyper focused moment that needs to feel really nice. But yeah, I think that's just like it's a perfect example of how we like to build. It's just launch, see what happens, and then react, and just embrace our velocity. And it's okay to be wrong, as long as we're kind of like getting the right feedback and tracking the right metrics.
Yeah. It's super cool what you're doing. My last question for you, I'd like to know more, I mean, what you think specifically about Perplexity's positioning in this crazy, like, AI, world we're living in. So positioning from Perplexity specifically, how do you think you guys fit in the
Well,
market?
I uh, I think there's a lot of ways to think about competition. Some of it's sort of like if you're the CEO of a company, right? You really want to have a plan. Um, but I would say I'm a product person, and I think I have the choice to think about competition or not, if that makes sense. If the difference makes sense. Uh, and I choose not to think about competition at all. I instead just think more about like what doesn't exist yet that I think should exist, and what am I learning today from the things we're launching. And it kind of keeps my head very, very focused on like just building useful stuff, because I think there's a major risk in thinking about competition too much, where you become a slave to that. You react extremely to other companies' ideas. Your impulse is to change your own roadmap just because someone else launched something, or um, just because maybe they did something different than you, and maybe you, for whatever reason, decide that like it's better than yours. There's so many traps you can fall in by just like obsessing over what the competition's doing. Um, and I've seen it all, and it's like actually kind of, I would say, the default response that people have is caring too much about competition. Um, that said, like there's things to learn from always, but uh, I think at my 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 reality is I don't use anything other than Perplexity, and I use Perplexity every day, and I think about how do I make Perplexity better. And I enjoy, it's kind of a zen. I haven't used ChatGPT in years. I don't know what it looks like or what's good or bad about it. Um, I'm just in my own world and focused on making our product good. And I think that'll my belief is that will lead us to more innovation, from a kind of first principles.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's super 'cause you guys are more so a product. You're not necessarily fighting that, the model race.
Totally. That's like a definitely a major difference, is like we're a consumer product company, and not an AI company. I think that's how I would frame it. We use AI to make products.
Yeah. Thank you so much for talking. I really appreciate it.
For sure. Of course.